This is Easter. Easter according to the Gospel of Mark, then according to Cameron Miller after that. And it's for my grandchildren, but also for you. You see, a lot of stories begin once upon a time, but this story begins a long time ago in a land far, far away. And that tells you what kind of story it is. It's a story that's true, even if some or all of it didn't really happen. That's the way of stories, you know. Stories are like a message stuffed in a bottle with a cork in it and thrown into the ocean. Someday, someone on another shore will find it, open it up, and read the message. In other words, some stories hold truth within them. And that truth or those truths are passed down from one generation to another, sometimes for hundreds and even thousands of years. It's how human beings have preserved truths that we have a tendency to forget. Well, this story is like that. It's a story about Jesus from Nazareth. Or I should say, it's the end of the story about Jesus. Now, I'd love to tell you the whole story of Jesus sometime, but this is Easter, so we'll tell this story at this time of year. Jesus lived in a place called Galilee. As places go, it was pretty small. Now, you and your cousins, you live in big cities. So think about the times when you come to visit us, and how we live in a town surrounded by farms, vineyards, and dairies. Jesus lived in a small town too, surrounded by countryside and even smaller towns. He spent 30 years out there in the countryside and small villages, talking to people about, mostly he talked to them about how to live together. You wouldn't think that'd be so hard, but, sometimes it is. He talked to them like a teacher does, like a really, really good teacher does, a teacher who you listen to and who you want to please. I hope you have some teachers like that. In the wilderness around them, as an example of what he taught, he might have pointed out that there were all kinds of wild animals. Lions, bears, leopards, hyenas, jackals, oryx, ibex, and wolves. Egyptian wolves. Wolves, he could have said, worked together to protect themselves from some of the bigger, nastier predators. They worked as a team to get food that they couldn't get by themselves. And that's how it should be with people, he taught, working together as a team. But the king, his name was Herod, and the Roman governor, who was even more powerful than the king, his name was Pontus. They were more like the alpha lions and hyenas. They ruled by making everyone else afraid of them. They inflicted their will with their teeth and their claws. Well, what Jesus taught was that Yahweh, which is the sacred name of the God who created the whole universe and everything in it, made the world so that it works good when humans work together and to take care of one another. But when we are ruled by bullies with big teeth and people only care about survival and getting stuff for themselves, well, then the world sort of falls apart. Now, we can see this, what I'm talking about, in green and blue. The next time you come to visit, we can walk to Seneca Lake and see what color it is. When people who live around the lake on the farms and vineyards and orchards and dairies and even the houses, when we all work together to keep from polluting the lake, well, then the water's very, very clear. You've seen it. You'll be able to see the rocks on the bottom, and there will be lots of ducks and herons and fish jumping all around. The blue sky will be reflected in the water of the lake, and we will see lots and lots and lots of blue. But if those of us who live and work around the lake, if we only care about ourselves, and we only take care of our own property, then the water will turn bright green. I'm not kidding. It'll turn bright green with algae, and it will be so ugly. And the green algae will kill the birds and the fish, and it will be so sad. Oops, I'm sorry, back to Jesus. Jesus was such a good teacher that lots of people wanted to listen to him and to try to live the way that he taught. He told them that if we created a kingdom on earth the way that Yahweh had imagined it, the way Yahweh had imagined it back in the beginning when the Big Bang started the cosmos of stars and planets and nebula, well, then things would go well for us. Likewise, that if we just gave in to the bullies that wanted us to live in a dog-eat-dog capitalist world, well, then things would go badly for us. In fact, Jesus got so popular teaching and telling stories that what he taught spread so far that a lot of people wanted him to go all the way over to the neighboring countryside called Judah, and even into the big city of Jerusalem and talk to people there. Now that would be dangerous, though, because Herod and Pontus, they were in Jerusalem, and they wouldn't like Jesus very much. They would see him as competition, like they saw everyone else as a threat to their own power. You see, Jesus and Jerusalem and Judah, and most of the world they lived in the Roman Empire, was what we call a hierarchy. A hierarchy is kind of a triangle or a pyramid with the biggest bully on top and everyone else scrapping for power and money underneath. Who do you think is on the bottom of a hierarchy, or at least that hierarchy? Poor people. People who farmed, and the people they could hire to work the fields, and people who make and fix things for the rich people, and women and children, especially poor women and poor children, and then anybody who was sick. Instead of raising people up and taking care of those who need it, as it's supposed to be in the kingdom of Yahweh, the hierarchical kingdom pushes most of the people down, and only a few people thrive on the very top. Herod and Pontus, they weren't going to like Jesus at all because he was telling about Yahweh's kingdom and getting people to see a new possibility, new ways to live. Now, even the religious authorities, they weren't going to like Jesus either. It didn't matter that Jesus taught people about God, which the religious authorities should have been excited about. But you see, the religious authorities had decided to join the hierarchy instead of God, and to get as far up on that pyramid as possible. And they got rich doing it. And they were part of keeping all the other people down below. So they did the dirty work for Pontus, who was the really big boss even over Herod, because he was the top of the hierarchy in Judah and Galilee. All right, to make a long story shorter, Jesus decided to share his wisdom in Judah and with the people of Jerusalem. There are a lot of details in this story, some of which are important to know, but I'm going to skip all that and get to the main story for Easter. Jesus started walking toward Jerusalem, and a bunch of people followed him. There were his 12 students, the ones from his classroom, and they all went. Plus, some of those students had family members who tagged along too. And then there were some others who really liked Jesus, so they went too. Altogether, there was like 70 people walking with Jesus. Now remember, they didn't have cars in those days, and Jesus and his friends were too poor to have horses or chariots or anything with wheels. So they walked. They spent the night with friends along the way and had a big slumber party. It was fun. And then when they got near the big city of Jerusalem, lots of people came out to meet them. It was a big parade, as a matter of fact. Hundreds of people, maybe even thousands, followed Jesus, and they cheered for him, and they waved banners all along the way. But somebody in the crowd sometimes called him to become the king, even though he didn't want to be king. They would call that, and then some of the religious authorities ran straight to Pontius and Herod and told them that people were calling for Jesus to be the king. They said Jesus was dangerous because if thousands of people thought he should be the ruler of Judah instead of Pontius, well, then they may try to take away Pontius's power and all of their money. That's the way people in the hierarchy think. Jesus and the parade that followed him went to the temple, which is a big, beautiful building, which the religious authorities told people was the only place where Yahweh lived. Now that wasn't true, of course, because Yahweh lives everywhere, in everything and everyone. Through the stardust and molecules that exploded across and through the cosmos way back in the Big Bang, Yahweh lives in it all. And some people say that wherever there is life, Yahweh is the light within the life that makes it live. Anyway, Jesus was shocked when he walked into the first huge courtyard outside the most special part of the temple. He couldn't believe his eyes that a place like that there were huge tables of stuff and merchants who were the Walmart and the Target and the Amazon of those days that set up these tables and tables and tables and more tables of stuff and more stuff, and they were selling it. This, he told all the people in the parade, this is what happens when people live in a hierarchy. So they started caring more about stuff and more about money to buy more stuff than they do caring about one another and figuring out how Yahweh intended for people to live. And when people care more about stuff, Jesus told them, and spend all their time and their money getting more stuff, well, then the lake turns green and other bad things happen. Well, the people in the parade got upset, and they started turning the tables upside down, and all that stuff went flying all over the courtyard. In fact, there was a very big upset, and the people working at the tables and the people in the parade got into big arguments, and the police had to come, and they had to get everybody settled down. Meanwhile, Jesus and his closest friend slipped out of the courtyard and walked back to their friend Lazarus' house, and they spent the night there, quietly and in calm. Well, again, to make a long story shorter, Pontius and Herod sent the police to arrest Jesus. With the help of their spies, they found him the next night, and they took him away in handcuffs. Poor Jesus. They beat him up. They beat him up badly. And they did terrible things to his body to show all the other people that they had big teeth. You know, like when the hyenas and the lions roar. That's kind of what Herod and Pontius were doing by beating up Jesus. Then sadly, they killed Jesus. And just to make sure everyone who had been in the parade and who loved Jesus would get the point, they hung his body on a huge wooden cross on top of a hill that could be seen from the whole city. It was a way to show that Pontus and Herod and the religious authorities were on top of the triangle, and that they were the bosses of the hierarchy. "Don't mess with us," Jesus' dead body was supposed to say, "or this will happen to you." But you know, a strange thing happened instead. After the bad guys said that they could take Jesus' body and bury it, some of his friends came and put it in a cave and rolled the stone over the entrance of the cave. You see, in that part of the world, the earth was so hard and rocky, and they didn't have very good shovels yet, and bobcat diggers weren't even invented yet, that they couldn't make graves in the ground the way that we do today. So they found places in the rock, little shallow caves, where they put the bodies and then covered the openings with rocks so that animals couldn't get inside. Anyway, some of Jesus' friends went to the cave on Easter morning, the way that we sometimes go to cemeteries and put flowers on the graves of people we loved, our grandparents or aunts and uncles or friends. But they were shocked and upset to discover that the stone covering the cave had been rolled away. They tiptoed up to the cave. They were scared. They were scared because it was very early and there wasn't much light yet. And when they peeked inside, they gasped. It was empty. The only thing in there was a blood-stained sheet that had been covering Jesus' body. But then all of a sudden, a stranger appeared, a young man they had never seen before. He said something really weird to them. He said, "Don't look for the living among the dead." Don't look for the living among the dead? And then he added, "Jesus has gone back to Galilee. You can meet him there." Well, they were totally freaked out. In fact, they were very upset. They didn't know what to think. They had seen Jesus dead. They had seen his body was lifeless. He could not be alive, could he? So you know what they did? They ran away. They ran away and didn't tell anyone what they had seen or heard because really, they were afraid. It freaked them out. And that really is how the story of the first Easter ends, with an empty cave and his friends running away in fear. But over the next 6 weeks or so, stories about seeing and talking to Jesus spread all across the countryside. Some people said he lived. Some people said he was a ghost. Some people said he died and came back to life. Some people said it was a miracle. Some people said it was a trick. Some people said it was a message to all of us. What I know deep in my bones, is it doesn't really matter what we think happened to Jesus, because his teaching still lives. You see, what he had to teach us about how to live in the kingdom of Yahweh instead of the hierarchy, well, that's still the best wisdom there is. I'm sad to say we're still captured inside the hierarchy, even though we don't want to be. But in those special times and places, we've been able to live together in the ways that he taught. Well, then the water never turns green. And the people and other animals are so much happier. Happy Easter.